Tony, it is a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So for listeners who are tuning in today, Tony is the husband of Colleen, who is an amazing senior HR business partner on the Xenium team. And so I've known Colleen for a long time, and people were like, you need to interview Tony. He's super connected in the business world and does some really awesome things. So I'm excited to have you on today. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, cool. Thanks.
So you're the executive director at the Kroc Center. Why don't you give me, I already know what you do, but maybe for listeners, give us an overview of your role and what the Kroc Center also does.
Yeah. So I'm the center director here at the Salem Kroc Center. So it's a 95,000 square foot community center. We have 2 swimming pools, a 30-foot rock climbing wall, workout equipment, and a gym. And then we have an entire space that's events and catering. And so we do a lot of various programming. I mean, obviously, we're open to the community for working out and things like that. But we do children's programming and by way of camps. In fact, we got spring break camps starting at the end of this week and running through next week. And then we do high school age programming now as well, helping students finish up their GED. We have a GED program on site now, and then workforce development skills, which is a big one for young people today, kind of getting their head straight about work and moving forward. So we do all that here at the Kroc Center, along with running various community programs and so forth. So yeah, my job really actually is to keep the machine oiled, build the team, foster a good culture within that team. And then once you have your team built right, man, you can almost do anything. So I love my people. Yeah,
I'm excited to get into that. You've been at the Kroc Center, you said 5 years, I think?
Yeah, 5 years.
And so being that you're a very mission-driven organization, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah.
So when you first came in 5 years ago, what was the culture like at that time?
Not great. Culture is predicated on leadership, right? I think most people would agree. When I got here, it wasn't great. And so under that kind of a situation, people tend to communicate less. They're a little more locked down. Things are very siloed. And I could feel it. It was palpable coming into the organization and trying to get my head around what had been going on. And I started figuring that out fairly quick, and then realized, man, I'm going to have to build some trust here because these people have been a little beat up. And so, they're sheepishly coming out of the woodwork as I'm trying to encourage that. And it was interesting, very exciting times there for a while. I had to make some, adjustments along the way. And again, that's part of putting that right team together, but it wasn't great initially.
Being that you're a mission-driven organization and you're there to serve the community and the kids, ultimately, do you think like having a culture that's not so great as you describe it, siloed, do you think that impacts your ability to serve?
Me personally?
No, the team, like to fulfill the mission.
Serve the community. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yes. In fact, it's interesting you asked that question. Early on, we were sitting around the ops table for our operations meeting, and I told the crew, things were starting to get a little better. I was starting to build some trust. I told everyone that day, I said, I'm going to go out in this community and I'm going to find some resources and I'm going to bring them back here and put them on this table. And you all are going to have to figure out what to do with them. And right now we're not quite ready for that. We have to learn how to communicate better, work together better throughout the facility and so forth before we add something like that to the table. And they all understood it. At that point, that was probably at only the 2 or 3 month mark, probably. But they could feel it is the thing. And they understood what I was saying from an ability for departments to work well together and figure things out and make adjustments on the fly and so on. And I think at that point, they understood it. And then later on, I was able to bring some pretty significant resources, and we'll probably get to that here.
Yeah, and I'm thinking like because you were so siloed and then you had that conversation of I think bringing people together is often really hard when it's been fragmented the way it was.
Yeah.
It's certainly a lot of work, and it was probably not just one conversation that allowed you to bring people together to start building trust. So what specific strategies did you start to create that fostered collaboration?
One-on-one meetings, really. A lot of one-on-ones throughout the building, and not just with my direct management team, but even a level below that, sometimes even below that. I'm a walk the floor kind of a leader, and so I'll even try to get to know a lot of our frontline staff as I bump into them as I move around the building. Again, big building, right? So I don't get to know everybody, but I try. And so that initially it's building relationships, and that's where, trust can start to form. And then I went and got certified to teach a program called Outward Mindset. It's a program that's used nationally and internationally, a leadership kind of a program that teaches people how to see people as opposed to seeing them as an object. So if you're in my way and I'm just trying to use you, you're more of an object to me, a means to an end, versus if I actually see you as a person, I'm less inclined to talk bad about you behind your back. I'm less inclined to not help you when you need help, and so forth. And so that was about the 6-month mark. I started teaching that in groups of about 20 to all the staff. And that was mixed groups of staff, which I really enjoyed because then that helped me get to know more staff. But that was probably the number 2 big takeaway, is kind of helping people have a language to communicate things like frustrations and tough conversations and so on. Gave us an outlet, I guess you could say, to work together better through that process. So relationship building, and then that tool mostly.
In the HR world, we call that like building a psychologically safe work environment, where you're putting in the work to allow people, like, see people for who they are as human beings, and that they're human beings outside of work just as much, and allowing people a safe space to be themselves and to bring up issues as they come up. It's not being met with resistance and fear and all that. You're trying to create a culture of trust and relationships.
And that safe place is key, and the space where it's okay to fail, right?
Yeah,
I mean, we don't want catastrophic failure, but we have to be able to fail so that we can learn to move forward. And most of my team now understands that, I'd rather be moving, making the best decisions that we can in the moment so that we can continue moving forward, versus waiting till we have all the answers and then move. That just frustrates people, actually. So I certainly wanted to build that platform of safety, because that's when you start getting your best performance, your best innovation. People aren't afraid to put their ideas on the table. We can talk about those ideas. Everyone feels heard. We can pick a direction that everyone can get behind, even if their idea didn't get sold that day. And I just love working like that now. I don't ever make a decision here in a vacuum, and I think all my staff would attest to that. Usually when big decisions have to be made, there's more than 3 people in the room, if not 5 or 6 sometimes. And then 2, I kind of jokingly say my staff don't let me go to a meeting without somebody keeping tabs. My staff would have.
But how did you maintain that vision throughout all the challenges early on, and maybe even like refine it to the point where you brought people along to the mission? So
I'm mission driven as an individual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to align, and I've done it in the last 3 organizations. I tend to align the vision of the organization with the fact that I'm mission driven. So as we come up with a vision and a mission and things like that in an organization, it's very much aligned with who I am. And those are facilitated conversations, and it just happens to end up that way. But I think part of that is how I roll. Once people see that I'm focused, and once I cast the vision of where we're going, people start to align with it, even if they're not fully sure how it's going to work. So part of that is the leader's ability to create that confidence that the team can accomplish a thing, right? And really, for me, the basis of it is my own personal mission and vision. And my vision is to inspire others to challenge the status quo. So I do that with my team. I can do that in front of a group of youth. In fact, I try to do it anytime somebody hands me a microphone, right? Try to get people to think about how can they change their life for the better, and every day should be an improvement. And then my mission is building transformational space with like-minded individuals. So I share that with my team early on in terms of just who am I? And then over time, they start to see that, that works for him. When I go to find those like-minded individuals to start a youth program or build a GED center or whatever, they tend to appear, right? And so part of what I tell my team is when the vision is big enough, the resources will find it. And they've been able to see that now many times play out. And so then that confidence and that trust continues to solidify under that. So who I am and the fact that I've got that dialed into that extent really drives everything I do, which builds confidence in the team. And then the team looks at the things we're going to do, and even if they feel like a stretch, they're ready to get behind it. And then they do amazing stuff. It's unbelievable what we've been able to accomplish. Yeah.
I love what you said there. In fact, you're like reading my mind, because I'd written that down from the first time you and I talked, and you'd said, if the vision is big enough, the resources will find it. And I think that's so profound. And what that tells me is that you're having to probably constantly reinforce that vision for the organization and your own personal vision as well. And I'm sure over time, it's going to either align the people that see the world the way you do and align with the mission of the organization, and then it repels the rest, whether that means they leave or they don't want to donate or however you get funded. But it also works in the opposite way, right? So like if you share your vision of helping the youth and what you want to do in the community, I'm sure the resources found their way. And maybe you have an example of that.
Oh, yeah. Coming out of COVID, we hadn't yet done high school age programming, and that's kind of my happy place. I particularly like serving kids that are hard to serve, or kids, your typical kids that mainstream education doesn't work for them. They've dropped out of high school. They don't know what to do with themselves, proverbially playing video games on their parents' couch in the basement kind of kids, right? And my goal is to re-engage those kids. And so what I knew as we went into COVID, I knew there was going to be funding coming to help youth because they canceled school. And I'm like, canceling school is going to create major problems.
Oh, yeah.
And politicians are really great at creating problems they later have to solve somehow. And so I just knew that there was going to be funding for that. And so here's the thing. We got shut down during COVID, right? And that's like turning off a switch. But turning this thing back on is like starting a locomotive. Like we were struggling to find staff, and my managers were on the floor filling in for staff so we could keep the building open. And it was tough. I had several managers burning the candle at both ends. And so here comes crazy me sitting down at the ops table saying, hey guys, we're going to start some youth programming, while everybody's burning the candle at both ends. So I said to the crew, I totally get where we're at right now. And we have two choices. One, we can not align ourselves for this funding that I know is coming, and then kind of miss the boat, and maybe we'll be able to catch it later. Or we can start aligning ourselves right now to get in front of it. And if we do really good at spending the funds, a lot of times they'll give us more to continue our work. And so everybody was on board with, no, we got to align now and move forward. And so the funding started coming in. We got the first round of 150,000, then we got 350,000. And we were cranking up our youth work, our high school age youth programming. And here's what was funny. We got a call. So that funding came through the school district. I got a call from the district one day, several months into this, and they said, hey, can we re-up the same grant that we just gave you non-competitively? So in other words, they're just going to double our money, and we just have to say yes. And so I was like, yep, Let's do it. So that was the funding. Really, that significant round of funding that really got our youth programs started was the funding I was talking about 3 months into my staff when I said, I'm going to go find resources and I'm going to bring them back and you're going to have to figure out what to do with it. It happened. It came in. And I said, and if we're good at spending, they'll probably give us more, which they did. I don't know what to attribute that to, right? It's your energy, it's your vibe. Some people might say, you put it out in the universe and it comes back to you. If you're a person of faith, you could say that God is in control of these things, right? If you're a person of goodwill, there's a force that's bigger than yourself out there doing something, right? And stuff just happens. But you have to cast a vision and people need to get behind it.
Absolutely. You said something to me when we first talked that I wrote down, and I wanted to get you to unpack it for me and for the listeners. But you said manage systems and lead people. I mean, that's a great philosophy. Maybe share your vision for what that means inside of your organization.
Sure. So nobody wants to be managed, but everybody wants to be led.
Yeah.
Right.
Coached.
I'd rather you lead me than coached. Yep. I'd rather you lead me than you try to manage me. Right. And so from that standpoint, as I look at things, here's a good example. When somebody gets promoted, and this happens a lot in my building, often, I shouldn't say a lot, where you got peers working together and now one of them becomes a lead who now has some authority over the peers they were just working with, right? We have to be careful to teach them how to become a leader, because the tendency in that context is to turn around and manage, meaning micromanage. And the reason is I'm really good at that, which is why I got the promotion, but it's all I know. So I'm going to go back and just get in everyone's weeds about it, right?
Yeah.
But what if we taught that individual how to be a leader? And one of the mantras we have around here is, don't hold people accountable, develop accountable people. And so what I teach my managers is, if you can develop your teams as accountable people, your job gets easier. You don't have to chase that kid around the building on the phone, trying to get them to put their phone down to do their job and so on, if you can help them become accountable to their work, right? And people get that. My managers get that. Yeah. It's an ongoing process, obviously. Kids bring various challenges to the table. Kids, I mean, these are really young adults, but I hire a lot of them here. So I got, we get tested from all sides all the time with this stuff. But yeah, so that's where that lead versus management comes into play. I'm trying to build more leaders. Yes, we have to manage things at a level, but one of the ways I try to get my people to lead is by telling them to delegate everything they don't have to do themselves. So with a young leader, it can be difficult because the young leader feels like they're handing off the dirty work, when really what they're doing is they're giving someone else an opportunity to learn and grow, right?
Yeah.
Quite see it that way yet. For leaders with a little bit more experience, they forget they can delegate. And so part of how I get at this is is the concept of the whirlwind. I talk about that, and the whirlwind is very jealous. The whirlwind of your day job, it really wants 100% of your time and attention. And so I teach my managers this, and I tell them, I'm jealous. I want 20% of your time, your brain power, so to speak, so that we can figure out where we're going next. And if you let the whirlwind take 100% of your time, it's harder for me to pull you in to be a part of that conversation, right? Where we're going, what we're doing, how we're innovating, and so that's another one of the kind of the tools that I use to help people think about how my managers, especially, how they're utilizing their time and how they're delegating, so that we can grow other leaders within the facility.
As you're talking, something just like totally came into my head about me growing up, and some of my best like coaches and leaders. I played 3 sports in high school, and some of the best coaches I ever had, before we'd even start practice, they would put out a set of agreements and say, here's what we're all going to agree to. Do you want to sign it or not? And what that kind of taught me and teammates that I've had is like, we can hold each other accountable. We need to be developed as leaders without even having a title.
Yes.
Maybe we're not a captain, maybe we're not the coach, but we can all lead and hold each other accountable. And it gives us permission to do that because we all share the same agreements. And I think you could do that inside of an organization. It sounds like you did something similar to that with any of your leaders. Before they become a leader, they probably need to have some sort of leadership contract or something that we're agreeing to. And that probably aligns the team pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it now is simply how they see me rolling with them. And then what's really fun is to see them modeling that to their teams, right? Or talking about how something worked because they employed something that they're learning, right? Because I can't touch everyone in the organization, but if I can build a good management team of leaders, it starts to trickle down. And so at the 5-year mark here, or almost 5 years, I've actually heard some frontline staff repeating some of the things we talk about at the highest levels of the organization, right? And so I'm like, it's working. Sheesh. Yeah. Because you really want, well, and you really want your frontline staff, or I really want my frontline staff to not just be checking in for a job. I want them to know that function that they do here when they come to the Kroc Center is part of something bigger. And I want them to feel it viscerally and be connected with it so that it's not just a job. Now, are we super great at that? No, but we're getting there. And part of that is helping that frontline staff feel cared about as a person. We've developed some other tools where we ask them what their goals are and how can we help you meet those goals. Maybe it's college, maybe it's trade school, maybe it's a better paying job. I know they're not going to be, 30-year careers here. So my question is, what can we do to develop this young person so that they're a better member of community when they leave? And that's where we operate from.
You and I were talking about decision making at one point, and I mean, as a leader, decision making is so challenging. It's a skill that's developed over years of experience, and we still don't get it right. But how do you balance the difference between emotional decision making and rational or logical decision making? Because I know for me, like when your emotions are heightened, you're probably not clear headed. So what do you do in that situation to make sure that you're making logical decisions? So unpack that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's emotion plays into everything with everyone, right?
Oh, yeah. We're human.
Yeah,
it's messy.
Exactly. And perception is everything. I teach that quite a bit too, right? If one of my team leaders thinks they're not doing something, and I'm catching it differently, I'm like, but you got to understand, their perception of what's happening right now is what matters to them, right? So when it comes time to make tough decisions, the way I say it is sometimes I have to take my emotional hat off and put on my logical hat and move through a process, right? So especially with like a personnel transition, those types of decisions are never easy, and they shouldn't be. If they're easy for you, better check your heart, right? Because you don't have enough empathy. But they're never easy. And so, but they need to be done. As a leader, your entire team is looking to you to make that hard decision, especially if someone's bringing down the team, or, they're kind of doing things that are, I call it rowing the boat in the opposite direction. And so it's the leader's job to fix that. Now, we can give our chances, our opportunities, our work programs, our, all the stuff that we do to try to correct the behavior. But at some point, if it's not happening, the hard decision has to be made. And for me, that's where I just got to put my logical hat on and ask myself, what is best for the cause? What's best for the team? What's best for the cause? And that's usually what gets me through those toughest times. I do have one little illustration. When I first got here, the marketing person that was on staff at the time, she was mishired, but that was before me. And so I got to know her, and we started talking about the next review that was coming up. And the challenge with that was she had great reviews because the leader before me didn't have the guts to
Hmm.
do what he should have been doing, right? And so I'm handed this and I'm like, I feel for her. This wasn't right. It's not fair to her. Anyway, we had hours and hours of conversations around the thing. She was trying to come along, and she just didn't have the skill set really, but hours and hours of conversation. And then finally one day she said, I'm going to start looking for work.
Hmm.
And I said, okay, I can write you a letter, and here's the 3 things I will write about. And she was really good at these 3 things. And I said, so I will focus my letter on these things and give you a letter of support. And so she was thankful for that. Anyway, the transition moved forward. So here's the thing. We're standing at the coffee line. I have a cafe in the building. Standing at the coffee line one day, and she leans over to me and she says, thank you for letting me keep my dignity.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
It's honest too. Like
yeah.
that was a gift. That was a gift that you gave her that she didn't have in her previous leader.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, again, tough decisions, but at the same time,
Yeah.
One way we can look at that is we're freeing someone to go be great where they can be great, right? If we don't make the hard decisions, we're just making it tough on everybody, including the person we should be making the hard decision about.
Yeah, it's a great example, and thank you for sharing that. How do you go about? Because I think this is the most challenging thing about like when somebody becomes a new leader and they don't have that kind of experience or yet, or they weren't taught it. How do you go about bringing new leaders along to that way of coaching and leading people? Because that is a skill that somebody is not going to, unless they had an amazing leader like you who's like kind of mentored them, they're probably not exposed to that kind of leadership. So how do you go about bringing people along and developing them?
I have the luxury in my job with the team that I have that does such great work. I have the luxury of being able to spend however much time I need to with a leader. And then I also pay attention to coaching in the moment. So if I see something kind of go down a little bit funky, I can follow up fairly quickly and say, I saw this go this way. A few thoughts for maybe next time. And then I'll give some examples. And that real-time coaching, I think, helps a lot, especially with a new leader. Yep. And then also, I invite new leaders to participate with me in different contexts, meetings, different things, so they can see how I maybe roll a tense situation or navigate through something that's a little hairy, so that they can begin to understand how it can be done. Because a lot of this is simply words and actions. It's how you say something, and it's your body language when you say it, right? And I've literally had managers go a little wonky in my ops meetings, and I'm like, oh man, I totally would have rolled that different, because they shut everyone down then and there's no open conversation, right? And so I'll follow up on those right after the fact as quickly as I can. Say, look, when you do that in a setting like that, it actually diminishes your leadership value. If you do it this way, it could actually grow your leadership value. And usually what I'm telling them at that point or sharing with them is, I want you to work on your executive presence. How you present yourself in front of others, how you present yourself in a meeting, how you say things, your body language when you're saying it, and so forth.
And that it takes time and experience, and like we talked about earlier with making mistakes and learning from them. And we're gonna make mistakes like that. I think that's the coaching in the moment is the gift for your leaders to keep developing. So I appreciate that. Where did you learn all of these things? I mean, were there books that inspired you? Did you go through some fancy leadership curriculum? Did you just have really good mentors? Like, is it all the above? What is it?
I'd say it's kind of all the above. I'm looking at my bookshelf over here that I let people borrow books off of, and it was a lot of books. So early on, I remember thinking, I'm not a leader, right? And I keep getting pulled into these places where I'm just volunteering, I'm just filling in, trying not to assume the title of leader. And finally one day I kind of woke up and realized I keep ending up in leadership spaces. I better learn how to do this
Yeah.
And then I did have a mentor. I wasn't a reader at the time, really, and I had a mentor that basically told me to get over myself and start reading. And so I started picking up leadership books and just got sucked into them. And that's eventually how I defined my personal life vision and mission and so forth. And yeah, so I mean, some of it's a little bit natural in terms of who I am and my personality, but a lot of it is I want to be better at this.
Yeah.
How do I be the best leader I can be? And some of it was having bad leaders along the way. Like, oh, I don't want
Right.
to be like
Like,
that.
I don't want to be
Right?
like that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And
It's,
then there's a great book called Multipliers. I don't know if you've read it.
yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
Yeah, but so that book kind of breaks down how we can get in our own way sometimes, even with our, if we're a very outgoing and visionary type of leader, even some of those things can diminish the team's performance if we're not aware and rolling those things correctly. That's one of my favorite books, actually. But yeah.
Yeah. Similar to you, I had a mentor early on, probably when I was in my early 20s, because I was, you get burned out in college, like reading textbooks, and then I stopped kind of reading. But I had a mentor who was like, you need to start reading. By the way, here's like 3 or 4 books. And nice. I remember I read How to Win Friends and Influence People. As like old as that book is and elementary in some respects, it is a foundational piece for how to interact with people. Yeah. I recommend that one to any young person or any like aspiring leader to read. That one, The Speed of Trust, was another one I read right when I got into the corporate world. That's Stephen M.R. Covey. I think it's the son of the late Stephen Covey. And that one was like, it's really simple. You probably don't need to read it now, but it's like when we can build trust in our relationships, things are done so much faster. Business is a lot easier.
Yeah. Teams
work in harmony, like not in silos. And so those are pretty foundational books for me early on, at least. And I'm an avid reader, so there's tons of others, but I always like to hear that people like yourself read. I can't stress it enough.
Right. Well, and just the power of that in a person as you move through life too, right? One of the other leaders in the community has a favorite quote that I love. She says, it's easier to convince the right person to do a job than it is to convince the wrong person that the job can be done. And I'm like, oh, that's beautiful, right? So as leaders, we're trying to find the right people. And sometimes the right person isn't part of the mix and you're like, oh, you can feel it. It's like, nope, they're not rowing the boat in the same direction. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah. Again, that's why it probably comes back to where we started the conversation, which is like, you got to talk about your vision and bring people along, continue to reinforce it, because it will either bring people along or it will get them to choose to opt out. And that's all we can ask for. It's the best gift we can have, is to make sure that everybody's in alignment.
Yep.
So. Yep. Well, over the years that you've been at the Kroc Center, it's been 5 years now. What do you say are the most challenging moments you've ever had as a leader?
Oh, let's see. Most challenging moments. It's frankly, it's dealing with upper level management, right? So
managing up,
bureaucracy of the thing, right? Because I want to move at a super fast pace, and that bureaucratic process slows me down. And so I have to, and I can't always lament that to my team, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to buffer them from some of that. And so that becomes kind of a challenge in, gosh, I want to move this thing and I want to encourage them that, hey, we're going to do this, but then I got to wait for answers. And so there's that delicate balance. And one of the ways I've found, at least here in this role, to overcome that is just slow down. Try not to move so fast, which I'm not used to, but I've adjusted to the pace a little bit and we've been able to do some cool stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, as we kind of close out this conversation, if you could speak to anybody who's listening to this and saying, like, thinking they work inside of a culture that's not where they want it to be, and they need to go through a culture transformation like you've been through, what are some of the key areas to start for them?
Whew, that's deep. But I get it, right? So people are hard. People bring everything to the table. You hire someone for a set of skills that are on a resume or what you talk about. And then by golly, the whole person shows up to work, right? All the baggage, all the stuff. And even more so today, and especially after COVID, that raised levels of anxiety and so forth. And so get it. People are hard. We just have to understand that. But people are people. They're human just like us. And so we need to see them as such, right? And then as we try to navigate the murky waters, there's a couple things I usually talk about in this space. One is, if you have the power within you to affect positive change within an organization, by all means, utilize that power and try to do your best to affect change. The other track is, if you're trying to do that and you keep hitting a wall and it just doesn't seem to work, maybe it's time to move on. Like I don't begrudge anyone who finds themselves in a place where they can't grow, they can't learn, they're held back, so to speak, by, who knows, micromanagement leaders or whatever. It's okay to move. It's okay to find a better place because you're working on you also in that context, right? So put some effort in, give it a chance, and if it's not happening, maybe it's time to move. So all of that's kind of wrapped up into that hard space. And the other thing is, know who you are. I can't stress this enough. If you talk to anyone on my management team, they'll give you an earful of Tony's mantra on this piece. And it's know who you are. Because if you know who you are, that helps you navigate forward, right? And part of what I like to say is there's this empty space inside of everyone, inside of your soul, that must be filled with something bigger than yourself. And when you understand who you are as an individual and what you want to accomplish in life, that begins to fill that space in your soul. And some people tell me, well, Tony, I'm not a visionary like you. And I say, you don't have to be a visionary. But what you do have to do is find someone whose vision you can get behind, that resonates with your soul, and get behind that vision and support it. And you'll fulfill the same need.
Yeah, that's well said. You said something to me when we were talking before, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so true. Is if you can't fulfill that purpose, that need with something like that, you're often going to fill it with something that's not so healthy.
Right. Yep.
And that's not a good place to be.
Yeah, exactly.
Tony, I appreciate you coming on. This has been a really fun discussion. It went a lot longer than I anticipated, but this is just so fun. What do you want to leave people with? Either a parting thought or invitation to connect with you, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you can always find me here at the Salem Kroc Center. If you Google that, our stuff will come up. Happy to chat over coffee or just ideate over stuff. I love thinking about visionary things and coming up with new, cool, creative things to do. My staff tries to hold my feet to the floor sometimes, which I love. So let's have some fun doing that if you're interested in a chat. And then, again, I would say, search yourself. Know who you are. What started me down that path was a book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why. Yep, that's a good book to read and start to figure out, how do you define your own statements, really is what it boils down to. Like, I struggled to get that stuff on paper for a long time. And here's the thing. Some of you are going to hear this and you're just not going to be ready to put that kind of time, energy, and effort into discovering your own life vision and mission. But at some point, you're going to be ready. And then you're going to dive down that rabbit hole until you've locked it in. And I want to encourage you to do that, because once you know who you are, once you've defined that, it frees you to say no to all the right stuff that you should be saying no to, and focuses you on your cause and your mission.
My guest today has been Tony Frazier. Tony, I so appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much.